Have you ever heard that a high-protein diet will destroy your kidneys? Well, this sort of statement has been brought to our attention over the years from many media outlets. However, you'd be hard-pressed to find any research to support this notion, with one major exception: people who have pre-existing kidney disease. It is amazing how people are frightened of eating or drinking protein because of how the media have blown this issue so far out of proportion. But because of this major caveat, it's important to always meet with your physician before drastically changing anything in your diet. Everybody is unique, and you don't want to rely on the statistics. You want to be sure that you know what's right for you. However, with this caveat, higher than typically recommended protein diets are safe and are effective for improving body composition. I've seen this firsthand in a number of the research studies that I've either directed or helped with. And adding more protein to your diet is really a good idea. But this leads me to another common myth surrounding protein. Have you ever heard that most people eat a high-protein diet already, particularly in America? Because Americans are known as meat eaters and generally eat a lot of food, it is common to think that Americans do indeed eat more protein than needed. And while this may be true for some individuals, we need to consider that recommendations are based upon your body weight and not a one-size-fits-all recommendation. So yes, some Americans may eat more protein than they need, but many don't. A much larger person, for example, needs more protein than a smaller person just to meet the very lowest recommended protein intake. For example, I just collaborated on a research project where we studied middle-aged people with class 3 obesity, which is the highest level of obesity. This means that each person in the study had a body mass index, or a weight to height ratio, that was greater than 40. And some of the people in the study actually did eat normal amounts of protein, but because of their large body weight, they were only eating about a quarter of the recommended daily allowance for protein, which, as you know, is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram, or 0.36 grams per pound of your body weight. So in this scenario, despite the obese people eating protein regularly, and likely an amount that is normal for the average sized person, it was far too low when body weight was taken into account. It didn't even meet the lowest recommended dose to avoid diseases. And when you consider that many studies tell us to eat more protein than is currently recommended, especially if you're active, then you may want to change a few things. So if you're sitting there questioning how much protein to eat, then you're in luck. Because in this lecture, we will talk about the amount and the timing and the type of protein that you might need to consume to lose body fat while maintaining muscle mass, even with a low-calorie diet. We'll also be talking about muscle growth and breakdown, and how as you grow older, you will need even more protein to support what is happening to your body. So let's get started. Let's say that you want to get in shape and you've decided to become fit. And you're told by your health professional that you should add more protein to your diet because you're working out now. You may say, won't adding protein just make me big and bulky? Absolutely not. After the myth about protein in the kidneys, this is the next major protein myth that I hear all the time. Many people still think that eating protein will somehow automatically add muscle and make them bigger. This is just not accurate, or gaining muscle would be much, much easier. When people start a diet or purposefully eat less food, one of the major risks is losing muscle mass. Sure, you'll lose body weight, but you may also lose a lot of muscle. And that, of course, is a problem because having muscle mass helps you to burn calories, stay active, and be healthy. So the question becomes, can you preserve muscle mass and decrease fat mass even with severe caloric restriction? Well, the research to date says yes. Remember the class 3 obese people in the research study I just told you about? Well, they were all put on a very low calorie diet. I mean, absurdly low, lower than I would ever recommend. But this was a medically mandated low-calorie diet due to the severity of their obesity. Well, when we added 12 weeks of resistance training and much more protein to their very low-calorie diets, they still lost a lot of weight. But they were able to maintain a greater amount of muscle mass compared to the people who did not incorporate resistance exercise. The cool part is that this was the case even though they were restricted to 800 calories per day. That means even when we are in a severe calorie deficit, eating more protein and lifting weights can help prevent significant losses in muscle mass that would otherwise be seen. Consider how important that is. The ability to maintain muscle while losing fat is one way to rescue our resting metabolism so that it doesn't drop too drastically. This means that you just increased your ability to fight weight regain or putting all of the weight back on, as is typical after the diet stops or changes. But this doesn't only apply to those on medically directed extreme weight loss plans and people who are severely obese, or what's referred to as morbidly obese. It also applies to anyone trying to lose body fat. When lowering your calorie intake in an attempt to lose body fat, you increase your chances of success by increasing, not decreasing, the protein in your diet. So, how much protein and in turn calories can you actually add without increasing your body fat? Well, in the most extreme example that I've seen, one study gave young, healthy men 4.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day for 8 weeks. This is nearly 4 times the recommended amount. This turns out to be an additional 1,200 calories for the average 150-pound or 68-kilogram person. With simple calorie counting, you'd expect these guys to have gained a lot of weight, right? But even with this increase in calories, the men in this study did not gain any body fat or muscle mass. Now, this huge dose of protein is pretty outrageous, and most of the time, completely unnecessary. But what about more reasonable increases in protein? Another study did just that. First, they put 39 physically active men and women who were about 21 years old and with a normal body mass index of 22 to 29 on a low-calorie diet. It was about a 40% reduction from what they normally ate. Then, they supplemented the participants with 3 different levels of protein. One group got the recommended dietary allowance, or RDA, for protein, which was 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. The second group got 2 times the RDA at 1.6 grams per kilogram. And the third group got 3 times the RDA at 2.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So what happened? Turns out that both the 2 times and the 3 times the recommended protein intake preserved muscle mass and reduced the body fat to the greatest extent while on a low-calorie diet. And the group that supplemented with 2 times the RDA of protein had the greatest effects. This means that during calorie restriction, a shift to increase the amount of calories you get from protein, which would replace many of the calories you get from carbohydrates and fats, will improve body composition. Even supplementing with milk has been shown to improve body composition when trying to lose weight. Researchers put overweight and obese women on an exercise and low-calorie diet for 16 weeks with varying amounts of protein and dairy. And they found that of all the women, they lost a significant amount of weight, but the high protein and high dairy group, which was about 30% protein and 15% dairy, lost the most fat from their stomach area and from their visceral fat. That's the fat surrounding your organs and is linked to so many health problems. But Another cool benefit also occurred while these women were on the low-calorie diet and exercising. Only the high-protein, high-dairy group was able to actually add muscle mass. Not to mention, protein intake from milk and other sources may help decrease your waist circumference and maximize your strength. Sounds pretty good, right? So simply putting yourself on a low-calorie diet isn't enough. Yes, you need to know something about the quantity of food you eat and drink, because a deficit in calories does create weight loss. But the type and quality of your calories matters too. If you want to lose fat, but also preserve your muscles, or even add muscle to help with your performance, mobility, and metabolism, then you should seriously consider increasing the amount of protein you eat. So research pretty clearly shows that people who add more protein to their diets tend to improve their body composition, particularly when exercise is also included. But what about massive amounts of muscle that we risk losing as we age? As you know, if you don't work to keep your muscle mass, you will lose muscle mass every decade after about 30 years old or so. The health implications and your ability to just move around depend upon keeping some of your muscle mass. Have you ever seen the older people you know losing lots of muscle? So what can you do? Particularly as an older adult, is there anything you can do about the amount of protein you consume to preserve or even prevent the muscle loss or even increase muscle protein synthesis? Yes, but first a little physiology lesson. When we talk about muscle protein balance, it is important to talk about both the synthesis part, which is known as anabolism or muscle growth, and the degradation part, which is known as catabolism or muscle breakdown. If synthesis matches degradation, you would not gain or lose any muscle. If, however, degradation is greater than synthesis, you would be losing muscle. Additionally, one really interesting thing about aging is that certain changes occur that actually make it harder for an older adult to use protein to build or maintain muscle mass. The body actually starts to resist anabolism or growth with age. This process has cleverly been coined anabolic resistance. Interestingly, even after consuming an amount of protein that is known to increase muscle protein synthesis, the synthesis response is lower in older adults compared to younger adults. So even though you hear about specific protein intakes like 0.8 grams per kilogram of body mass per day, that is recommended to avoid disease states or muscle wasting, and it is far too low to actually optimally improve body composition, especially as you age. But what is the effect on muscle protein synthesis if you get your protein dose after exercising? For example, we know that the ideal dose of protein after exercise to stimulate muscle protein synthesis or muscle growth, as well as a host of other benefits, is about 20 to 25 grams of protein. The research was done only with young men. However, most experts use the same range for young women. But what about in older women and older men? Well, one study gave elderly men 1, 10, 20, or 40 grams of protein immediately after resistance training, and found that with 20 grams of protein, muscle protein synthesis remained elevated compared to baseline levels of muscle protein synthesis. And that's pretty good. But here's the kicker. Muscle protein synthesis was even higher with a 40-gram dose. So it seems like older muscles respond better to higher protein amounts. Recently, it has been shown that even more protein above the RDA, even in young people, may further contribute to the muscle protein balance equation by reducing muscle protein breakdown. So, if you're 20 years old and you eat or drink about 25 grams of protein following a workout, you will likely maximize your ability to make new muscle proteins. But you need almost twice this amount, that is about 40 grams post-exercise when you are older, in order to have the same result as seen in the younger people. And what age does this occur? Well, it's probably quite variable, but I would like to take this into account and consider upping my after-exercise protein intake after about age 40. A recent scientific review paper pointed out a number of reasons why this anabolic resistance might occur as we age. And some of these include decreased digestion and absorption of protein, decreased ability for your muscles to absorb amino acids, and decreased anabolic signaling once the protein is eaten. Sounds challenging, right? Well, this anabolic resistance in older, healthy adults can be overcome with a higher intake of dietary protein. The entire process for muscle repair, maintenance, and growth is just blunted as we age. You may just need an extra push, like more protein to have the response that you want. Okay, so you're probably thinking, just how much protein should I be consuming to keep my muscle protein synthesis high? One study gave healthy older men 10, 20, or 35 grams of whey protein and found that the absorption and muscle protein synthesis was greater with 35 grams compared to 10 and 20 grams. And it looks like we have some sort of anabolic threshold when we talk about protein intake that simply rises as we get older. And that threshold needs to be met in order to stimulate a response. An increased protein intake seems to have a long-term effect as well. One study looked at the level of protein intake in older men and women over 3 years. After a complete dietary analysis, the participants were grouped into 5 groups based upon their levels of protein intake. And it turns out that the group that consumed the highest average amount of protein, about 19% of their typical diet over the 3-year period, had the smallest loss in muscle mass over the same time. In fact, they had 40% less muscle loss than the group with the lowest protein intake that only ate about 11% protein in their diets. In other words, more protein in the older people helped them to maintain their muscle mass, much better than the lower protein intake. Overall, if you are an older adult, do not fear protein. In fact, I would make sure that every time you eat, you include a lean source of protein. All right, so we've pretty clearly established that you should consume a good amount of protein, and hopefully the case for a protein intake that is greater than 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight is a no-brainer now. But what are the actual recommendations for daily protein consumption from different organizations? Unfortunately, the answer varies across organizations. The American College of Sports Medicine recommends 10 to 35% of your total calorie intake to come from protein, which equates to about 200 to 700 calories in a standard 2,000 calorie diet. They also recommend increasing protein intake to 1.0 grams per kilogram of body weight after around age 50, and increasing even further in active older individuals. This is not bad considering all of the research supporting more protein for improved body composition, health, and performance. But if you are very active, then what? How much do you need then? Well, the International Society of Sports Nutrition recommends 1.4 to 2.0 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight for active individuals to improve training adaptations to exercise. This is strongly endorsed by the most current research. Other leading international organizations like the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the European Society for Clinical Nutrition and Metabolism recommend somewhere between 1.0 and 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, depending on your activity level and health status. So, Recommendations are beginning to increase, and the research tells the story. And just to recap, some food sources that are great for protein are eggs, lean chicken, beef, and fish, and things like Greek yogurt, nuts, peas, tofu, seeds, and quinoa also pack a protein punch. And even though I mentioned this in the beginning of the lecture, it is worth repeating, because one of the questions that I continue to get asked regarding the amount of protein we eat is this: is too much protein harmful, and won't my kidneys shut down? I want to tell you again, absolutely not. This is wrong. But the myth persists. We already talked about the research support for a higher protein diet. These studies show no evidence of kidney disease resulting from eating more protein. Here's the deal. On a high protein diet, your kidneys do perform more work to handle the protein. However, increased action does not equal damage. This is because, like all our other bodily functions, the kidneys are very good at adapting. And one study found that markers of kidney function are not affected in strength athletes with multiple years of high protein intake. However, there is likely a time when you don't need any more protein. More than 1.5 grams per pound or 3.3 grams per kilogram of body weight is not needed or recommended. As 1 gram per pound, which is 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, is enough and far exceeds the 0.36 grams per pound or 0.8 grams per kilogram that is traditionally recommended. Overall, there is no overwhelming evidence that says that protein harms the body, but anything in excess can potentially be damaging. That's just common sense. But unfortunately, common sense sometimes goes out the window when people talk about new diets and eating fads. And of course, always double check and change your diet with your healthcare provider to make sure it's a healthy choice for you. Now, let's go beyond just how much protein we should eat and move on to topics like when we need to eat it and at what frequency we should eat protein. This is a concept called nutrient timing. The first thing to talk about is, when do you want to eat? For example, if you like breakfast or a late night snack, then eating at those times will probably help you stick to your plan. However, the food you pick and eat at those times will make the difference in how your body ultimately stores the energy. So, how should your daily protein needs be split up over a day for the best results? Well, eating about 20 grams of protein per meal, spaced evenly throughout the day, is commonly recommended. The research here is mixed though. Unfortunately, research shows us that older individuals typically consume about 8 grams of protein at breakfast, 12 grams of protein at lunch, and a maximum of 40 grams of protein at dinner. And this type of spread of protein is considered protein backloading. It is very common, but for optimal results, it seems that the dose of protein should be spaced a bit more evenly throughout the day in order to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. In overweight and obese older individuals, evenly spaced protein stimulates muscle protein synthesis significantly more effectively than this backloaded practice. Interestingly, when resistance training is added, muscle protein synthesis normalized no matter how they ate their protein. Backloaded or not, resistance training improves how we respond to eating. A study that I worked on showed that a higher protein diet, 35% of total calorie intake, spaced across 6 meals per day, significantly reduced body fat and abdominal fat. And lean mass remained higher compared to the same amount of protein eaten over just 3 meals per day. And when compared to a more common and lower protein intake like 15%, the high protein eaten more frequently approach was also better for body composition and metabolism. Think about it like this. If you can spike your protein synthesis on more than one occasion in a day, you will probably have a better net effect at the end of the day than only spiking your muscle protein synthesis at one meal, where you happen to get all of your daily protein. But I also know people who simply don't like eating frequently. It can be a hassle and take too much time. Well, you can also have great results eating less frequently. You just need to be sure that when you do eat, you're eating nutrient-dense foods and that you're getting high-quality protein in those foods. Now, another time of day that people often want to eat is before bed. Do you find yourself hungry before bed, maybe wanting a snack, but believe that it's not a healthy habit? It's not only not unhealthy, it may actually be good for you to eat a small protein snack or drink a protein shake right before bed. When younger and older men were given 40 grams of casein protein before bed, their muscle protein synthesis was significantly higher overnight when they drank a no-calorie drink. And this was regardless of their age. And it worked for young and old alike. Now, this was not done in women, but I think similar results would occur. This study shows us a couple of things. One, you may be able to improve your body composition by having a nighttime protein snack. And two, although older men have lower rates of muscle protein synthesis than young men, both age groups have an increase in muscle protein synthesis when taking a protein shake before bed. But how do other macronutrients and other forms of protein eaten before bed, besides casein, affect metabolism and health? Interestingly, a study from our lab showed in young active men whether eating a carbohydrate, whey, or casein protein snack before bed that had about 140 to 150 calories in total, resting energy expenditure the next day was increased compared to eating nothing at night before bed. But when we did a very similar study in obese women, their next morning resting metabolic rate had a more favorable increase if protein was consumed before sleep, but interestingly, not with carbohydrates. The difference was very small, but the pattern that we noticed was pretty interesting. Essentially, the effect of a nighttime snack on next day resting metabolic rate was influenced by the sex, age, and fitness level of the person in the study. What about the effect of nighttime eating on body composition? Well, we looked at this over a 4-week period where overweight and obese young women had a carbohydrate, whey, or casein snack before bed every night. And they also exercised 3 days per week. Now, although nobody lost weight, all 3 groups increased their muscle mass in the study. What's more is that the whey and casein groups, they had protein, tended to decrease fat mass, whereas the carbohydrate group had no change. Now, these differences were very small and not statistically significant, but it has pushed us to look further into new research to see exactly what is going on. The first study to look at 12 weeks of nighttime eating before sleep and exercise training recently found that by simply drinking a protein shake before sleep, muscle size was improved and so was strength. Now, it looks like a very small 150 calorie protein drink before bed may actually be advisable rather than something to avoid. But I'll be the first to tell you that much more research is needed in this area, and I'll talk much more about nighttime eating later in this course. In sum, protein consumption should be on the top of your mind and probably timed to multiple feedings in a day to achieve your optimal body composition results. But it can also be difficult to eat a lot of protein meals. It just makes sense that you may feel full. So, an easy way to add extra protein is in the form of protein powders. There are many types of protein powders on the market. So let's just talk about a few things to look for before you purchase one. First, there are many forms of protein. Whey protein isolate is considered the most pure form of protein. Hydrolyzed whey protein isolate is the most expensive because of the purity and the process involved to make it. But whey protein concentrate has less filtering and therefore more natural carbohydrates and fats from milk, making the protein content lower in most cases, about 35 to 80% protein depending on what you buy. The other two very common sources and types of protein powders are from casein, which is also from milk, and soy protein. Although these proteins also increase muscle protein synthesis, whey is usually considered best for improving muscle protein synthesis, especially post-workout. This is because of whey's higher leucine content, the essential branched-chain amino acid that contributes the most to muscle protein synthesis. Casein and soy are good options though, for people who just don't like whey, want something that is slower digesting, that would be casein, or for vegetarians who might choose soy. But many other sources also exist like hemp, pea, and even bug proteins, but less research exists on those. Milk, as you probably guessed, is also an acceptable source of protein and been found to increase lean body mass greater than soy protein after 12 weeks of a resistance training program. But keep in mind that milk also has both carbohydrates and fat in it. So, what do you look for on the label of a supplement? Well, you want the highest percent of protein per scoop. You ideally want a powder with more than 80% protein in each scoop. For example, 25 grams of protein in a 28 gram serving scoop equates to 90% protein, perfect amount. Take caution though when reading labels on protein powders. Many powders have added proteins that our body cannot use towards building muscle, even if they contribute to the total nitrogen content of the product. Some examples of protein fillers are L-glycine and L-taurine. And supplement companies cleverly market these fillers to make them out to look like they will help you, but they probably won't. Overall, protein powders can be great, convenient way to increase protein intake, and most of them taste great. You can't beat the great effects on body composition with the addition of this supplement. So we can see that a protein intake above recommended levels will be beneficial for body composition. And don't worry, if your kidneys are healthy, increasing your protein is completely safe. And using protein supplements is not required, but it can be a very convenient way to get in the required protein amounts no matter what your age and activity level. When it comes to weight loss, the addition of protein to the diet will aid in fat loss and muscle gain or preservation when combined with exercise training, even if you are in a severe calorie restriction. You also know that as you age, maintaining and improving your muscle mass can be a challenge. This is called anabolic resistance. However, when adding a larger than recommended amount of protein to the diet, it has been found that not only is muscle protein synthesis maximized, muscle protein degradation slows down too. In older individuals, it seems as though the higher the protein, the better. In terms of recommended amounts, it looks like about 2 times the RDA can cover most of your bases. This would be about 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, or 0.72 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So if you weigh 150 pounds or 68 kilograms, you would aim for about 110 grams of protein per day. This could be 2 eggs for breakfast, a Greek yogurt for a morning snack, a palm-sized portion of chicken for lunch, and a scoop of protein powder for an afternoon snack, followed by another palm-sized portion of lean meat for dinner. I really hope that you consider analyzing your diet and maybe increasing your protein intake. It can certainly help to combat anabolic resistance and improve body composition. Try this. Experiment with protein powders to find one that makes it convenient for you to take in enough protein to optimize your body composition.